How will the Ukraine war end? Our leaders have too failed to define victory. And while this article, this headline, this opinion piece is, interesting to me because it delves into Nigel Farage, his opinion of how the war should end. I think there are starting to be a coalescing of opinions about the war and some of the unrealistic claims that took place at the beginning. We see that in the Ukraine war, there were a lot of bluster, a lot of bolstering about total victory on both sides. Total victory as defined by Zelensky of pushing Russia completely out of the country, and then total victory on the other side of Russia being able to get everything that it wants. And I think that we're really analyzing and really stepping away from it and asking ourselves, what does victory actually look like? And I think that's where some of the people in the Biden administration and in the G7 and in NATO should have begun the discussion about the war, not just after the war started, but before the war ever began. And I believe if we had done this, we would be in a far different position now than we are ultimately going to end up in. Because to be honest with you, all of the outcomes don't look good for the world. Every single one of the outcomes associated with how this war could win is an outcome that is dangerous, that is reckless for all of humanity, regardless of where you are in this, the spectrum of support for Ukraine or for Russia. Ultimately, this thing will end with global security not being greater, but being lesser. This thing will end. I know the United States said that their primary goal was to weaken Russia. Regardless of how this ends, the United States, all of its allies, as well as the allies within the global south that Russia is depending upon, all of their security will be diminished, not enhanced. Let me give you 3 outcomes to the Ukraine war that I want to just analyze. These are possible outcomes, but they are based on the facts on the ground as well as the reports that we are receiving. The first of the outcomes that could be a potential outcome for how the war ends is, what if Russia wins? What if Russia wins this conflict? Ukrainians contemplate the once unthinkable, losing the war with Russia. And there was a time early on in this conflict where morale was high. The West was pumping up the Ukrainian people, pumping up the administration, flying Zelensky all across the world. We're going to be with you all the way. But, all great plans have to meet up with reality. And in this case, the reality is reality on the battlefield. And so once the plan met up with reality after a couple years, it has become more and more evident based upon the events on the ground and the constructs, the global constructs of this war, the contours that define whether countries have the capacity to win, their economies, their population, their morale, their equipment, all of those things. When we're now seeing on the battlefield, the things that lead to victory are starting to overpower the Ukrainian morale. And it was clear from the beginning that these things would, in the long run, if Ukraine could not win in 1 year, in 2 years, that the longer a war stretches on, the atmospherics take hold. The longer a war stretches on, the country with the greatest economy, maybe they had mistakes on the battlefield, maybe they had untrained personnel, but if they stay in the fight long enough, their economy, their technology, the country with the largest population, those factors matter in prolonged wars in ways they do not matter in short skirmishes. And as this war drags on, the advantage is going to Russia. And people are starting to ask the question over and over again, what happens if Ukraine loses? And I think that this is a question that the West should have asked from the beginning, because all of the atmospherics were in Russia's favor. Perhaps in the short run, there was a lot of inexperience, but in the long run, things will change. Russia is making daily tactical gains in eastern Ukraine as concerns swirl around Ukrainian military reporting. Ultimately, the facts on the ground are showing that not only has Russia learned and adapted, but that Russia has proven its capacity to bring material, equipment, and manpower to the fight and to stay in the fight, even though they are fighting not just against Ukraine, but they are fighting against foreign soldiers and advisors from around the world. And when we look at the map, there's an interesting thing that is taking place on the ground in Ukraine, is that Russia is opening new fronts to exploit the critical weakness, and I call it the critical weakness in the Ukrainian plan. And I'm going to cover that in a minute. The critical weakness. By exploiting these new fronts, what Russia is doing is stretching Ukraine's manpower to the limit. When you're fighting an opponent that has a higher population and a larger armed forces and can draw upon a larger population to even increase the size of those armed forces, you create a situation where as long as there's a bottleneck, as long as the territory that is being fought over is heavily fortified and is constrained to a certain area, it becomes much easier to defend. But as Russia continues to expand the front line, and it doesn't have to do much. It doesn't have to, I hear all the time, all of this talk about the Kharkiv offensive and how that offensive is not succeeding. It is succeeding in its ultimate goal of expanding the front line, causing Ukraine to shift resources from the east and other places, limited resources that it does not have to, they don't have the air defense systems to cover the entire front line. That's why you see an increase in activity of the Russian Air Force. They don't have the systems, the manpower, the equipment, the material, the artillery to fight a war that is stretched out along this broad a front line. And what we just heard reports yesterday that Russia has continued to expand the front line even further on the northern front of this conflict. And every time they do that, Ukraine has to scramble more troops and equipment. They have to bring troops and places from all over Ukraine, hobble together units and try to put together a defensive force that can bolster the area of attack. And every time they do this, it makes the rest of the front line weaker. And that's how one of the ways in which Russia is making advances is not by having a large northern push, but by forcing Ukraine to spread its forces, its limited forces. You see, the thing that we don't realize is that Ukraine has limited forces and it cannot defend the south, the east, and the north simultaneously without cannibalizing other units. And it's this cannibalization that not only makes the front line in the east and the south weaker, but it makes all of the units less effective that are defending these areas because they've hobbled together groups and rushed groups in and they've weakened themselves in other places. And those are the places that Russia continues to do these probing attacks. They find weakness and then they pour in the resources to make an advance. And it's this slow grind that not only is taking territory, and it's not about the territory so much. I think we've looked into these maps and we've gotten caught up. The media has kind of given us a flashing object to look at. And that flashing object does not reflect reality. Just want to pause and say thank you to all of you who are watching and ask that you would consider joining our members only access pass to help the channel and to get members only content that is provided weekly to all of those who support us with their contributions, their monthly contributions to the program. The reality is that it's not just about the territory. It's about the loss in manpower that is occurring. And if Russia wins, it will be primarily not because of equipment, it will be because of manpower shortage on the Ukraine side. Also, if Russia wins, here's another reality that the West is terribly afraid of. A Russia win means the emergence of a new world order, an emergence of a bipolar world where Russia and China create the backbone or the foundation for a global South military and economic pact that will challenge the G7, NATO, the EU, all of the Western institutions, the IMF, and all of these institutions will be under pressure because there will be a counterweight where there has not been a counterweight in global politics and the global scene. It has been the U.S. gets its way. Whatever it says is right is right. Whatever it says is wrong is wrong. That has been the continued situation in the global sphere of geopolitics between nations for decades now. And that is beginning to shift. And I think the United States is having difficulty recognizing that with all of the money and resources and military bases that they have invested in, they are now seeing that those things are not leading to the type of success in these localized regional conflicts, that they've tried to extend the power of their military beyond what was reasonable when there are global and regional powers in these areas, trying to fight in the doorsteps of Russia. Russia has a strategic advantage because of proximity. Trying to fight on the doorsteps of China. China has a strategic advantage. And these are the types of things that the U.S. planners and the Western planners, as they decided that they would dominate the entire world, that they would spread military bases even up to the doorsteps of these great powers, not realizing that these powers have a regional advantage and that if the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And that's the other issue that we will see. If Russia wins this war, if Russia comes out on top, you will see more and more nations gravitating to this emerging alliance of Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. And there are those who are a part of the alliance, even though they are not nearly as vocal, but they are definitely allies of Russia, like South Africa and other countries within the Sahel region. Other players even in South America. There are those countries that will move and continue to gravitate towards this emerging power base that has the potential to level the playing field. And that's what it's about. We have seen from modern conflicts that the West rules-based order is a farce, that the West signs contracts, signs treaties, reneges on those treaties. The West signs deals, goes back on those deals, that the West engages in activities, creates these narratives for why they need to invade and why they need to go into Libya and why they need to go into Iraq, why they need to engage in all of these activities. And then when another country who has a more legitimate claim uses some of the same justifications, all of a sudden it becomes a global crisis and an attack on the rules-based order. This dual standard that, I saw an article the other day where India was pointing out to the West that it has these double standards that it is employing, and that is really the source of the collapse of the rules-based order, because it doesn't seem like a rules-based order. It seems like a tool for control and power to try to make the world think that when the West is doing something, they are in the right, and when everyone else is doing the same thing, they're in the wrong. This new order is going to shift not just the military alliances of the world, but it will shift the economic alliances of the world. Look how long North Korea has been isolated. Look how long North Korea has been on the fringes of international politics. This war has brought North Korea right into the forefront and has put them in connection with resources, economic resources, geopolitical strengthening of their position. We are entering a world where if Russia wins, we will be in a bipolar world. But that also means something else. It means that the West has reached the extent of its conventional might. And what I mean by that is, it was one thing for the West, for NATO, to gang up on Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, and to kill and assassinate him and to bomb the country, to do the same thing in support of Syria, to be sending in troops and taking land from the Syrian people and making military bases without their consent, without their desire, their expressed desire for the United States to vacate its land. It's one thing for them to do it in that context, but in the context of a global alliance that is a counterweight to NATO, those actions would create a confrontation of epic proportion, especially considering that Russia is proving that in conventional means, when the global South and its partners come together, that the G7 has not the ability to overpower them in this way. And I see that, yes, while they're fighting in Ukraine, I can also see the situation of direct confrontations, not through proxies, but in direct fashion in other parts of the globe, like Syria, and other parts of the globe where the United States has, against the will of countries, set up bases, where the West has, against the will of host countries. We saw that in the Sahel. Look at what just happened in Africa when the country's leadership, you call them juntas, you call them dictators, call them whatever you want, but they were the leadership of the countries and told France and told the West to get out. What did the West say? We won't leave until a government comes into place that we respect and will allow us to stay. What kind of nonsense, what kind of mumbo jumbo logic that is. So they're going to stay by force and not recognize the government that is in power telling them to leave until a government that they handpick gets into power, which we know is going to tell them to stay. But ultimately, they had to get out of there. And that is going to be the situation around the world once this Ukraine war is over. If Russia wins, people will be emboldened, new alliances will be formed, troops and material will be shifted, and this will be a proxy war all across the world where conventional weapons, the West will not have the advantage in conventional weapons. And I think that's why Macron has gone to talking more about nuclear deterrent, because he is seeing the limits of Europe does not have great armies. Let's be honest. The European Union and the European powers, they have armies that are better than some countries, but their armies cannot stand up against Russia. The European armies cannot stand up against China. Let's be clear. The armies in Europe are diminished shells of what they once were. They may have had heydays, but when you look at the UK and you look at its Navy, the UK Navy doesn't have the ability to stop people in lifeboats and makeshift rafts from sailing right up to the coast and debarking on UK land. The European Air Force does not have the might that it once had. These countries are, they're like paper tigers. And ultimately what's happening in the Ukraine war is it's proving that Donald Trump in this instance was right, that the European countries have not spent enough money on conventional arms so that they can defend themselves, which is why they are becoming proxy states. UK, France, Germany, these are proxy states of the United States. At this point, they have no autonomy because they are dependent solely on the United States for their defense, for the not just their defense, but they're dependent upon the United States' might to impose a global order where they have an advantage over the global South. So as long as the U.S. shares the spoils of its imperialism and its neo-colonialism, they're going to walk in lockstep with whatever the United States says and does. These are not autonomous countries. These are proxy states. We hear all the time, they talk about Hezbollah as an Iranian proxy. Well, Europe is a United States proxy, and so is Ukraine. All of these countries are at the behest of the United States, and they are at that behest so long as the conventional weaponry is sufficient for their defense. Now, when that no longer becomes the case, they've got to escalate to a nuclear posture. And that's what Macron is talking about. He wants to evaluate because he sees that it's possible that the war will be lost in Ukraine. And if conventional means cannot create not a deterrent, because we got to always remember that they're not interested in deterrent. They're interested in advantage. And Russia's not going to stand idly by and allow the West to build a nuclear posture. They have long-range bombers. They have airfields. So does Russia. So does China. So do other members in the global South. They are also nuclear powers and have the capacity to have long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. What we will see is a new nuclear arms race if Russia wins. And I don't know how that's good for anyone, but ultimately, based upon the facts that are currently on the ground, it's clear to me that that's where this thing is heading to. Ukraine war latest. Russia says it is considering nuclear shift and tells West it is playing with fire. U.S. leads drills after North Korea warhead test. Ultimately, we see this over and over again. When the West is not able to gain advantage conventionally, they shift the conversation to nuclear. And that's what's happening all over the world. We will see a global nuclear arms race soon as it becomes clear to the West that they have lost the war in Ukraine. That if something drastic does not happen, that is where this thing is heading. Now let's look at another scenario. What happens if Ukraine wins? This is another scenario that I can't stress enough, because this scenario comes with its own possibilities, its own pitfalls for humanity. What if Ukraine wins? Victory in the war would not end the conflict with Russia. And I think that's probably the most truest statement that has ever been reported on this conflict. That even if Ukraine got something that resembled a victory, the conflict with Russia and the global South, this is just the beginning of what is going to be a decades-long global struggle for power, equality, and respect by the global South against the West and against those countries that the West has exploited over many, many years. I like this picture of Zelensky because this is the real picture of Zelensky. He travels around the world in these ridiculous camouflage and pseudo-camouflage military outfits. He is not fighting on the front line. And I'm not sure why he shows up to Congress and does addresses in public places where everyone else is in suit and tie. It's all a farce. It's all for public display. It's all sandbagging the Western media. They want to portray an image that is not real. If this Zelensky were to win, the reality is that it will not be because of Western equipment shipped to Ukraine. Western equipment shipped to Ukraine has proven that it cannot in its own right change the dynamic on the battlefield. All of the Western equipment that is flooded in continues to be inadequate, so they flood more and more equipment in. And that equipment proves over the long run to be inadequate to tip the scales. Look how much money has been poured into this war. Look how much equipment, so much equipment has been pouring in from the United States and the EU that they've emptied out many of their reserves and their stockpiles. And the current equipment or the current tranches of money that are being approved by these countries' legislatures are really to refill the stockpiles from all of what they have lost. Equipment alone, fighter jets alone, artillery shells alone, ballistic missiles alone will not help Ukraine win this war, because at the end of the war, and I say this over and over again, and I've been proven right, over these months that I've been broadcasting about the Ukraine war, I've been proven right that the reality of war is that it's the soldiers, their courage, it's the fighting men of Ukraine that will decide this war if it is to be won. And they have a strategic problem. Their main problem is that there's not enough of them. It's not their courage. It's not their training. It's not their morale. The problem with the Ukraine war, and I say this over and over because I think with all of the mainstream media reporting on the matter, it's all farce. There's no true factual information about really the global atmospherics that will determine victory or loss in this conflict. The true atmospheric, the one category that matters more than any other. Don't let the Western media pull the wool over your eyes. Every other week, there's a new ATACMS, HIMARS, fighter jets. I just heard today they're sending out the Patriot missile. None of that will determine victory. What determines victory is the fact that Russia has a larger population. And as so long as this war remains a war of attrition, Russia has the advantage. People talk about the advantage. The advantage goes to the one who can continually replace their losses. Replace their losses in equipment, yes. But more importantly, it takes a long time to bring men, fighting age men, to the front lines. And it's fighting age men that man trenches. It's fighting age men, capable of men that dig those trenches and that build those fortifications, that run into the buildings that are being bombarded by artillery shells. That's what will determine victory in this. And ultimately for Ukraine to win, NATO has to deploy troops to this conflict. So when we talk about a Ukraine victory, especially the one that Zelensky's talking about reclaiming all Ukrainian territory, all territory that was Ukraine prior even to the retaking of Crimea by Russia. And that's why you see this trickle. NATO starts deploying troops as Russia races to win. We're going to see a consistent, continuous trickling in of more and more Western troops, not just the unofficial troops. We hear a lot about these unofficial troops, these non-state sanctioned troops that have gone into Ukraine to fight in these foreign legions, many of whom are ex-military, just came out of the military, and their status as it pertains to their connection to their home countries is quite dubious, in that these countries had the ability to stop them from even traveling to this war, but sanctioned their travel, and in the act of sanctioning it, ultimately entered the war themselves. All of these NATO countries and European countries have military advisors in Ukraine fighting. They say they're not fighting, but they are doing military targeting, helping with equipment. What else do soldiers do? That's what soldiers do. Every soldier does not have a M16 and is in a trench or in a bunker somewhere. So NATO is fighting now, unofficially, in Ukraine. And ultimately, for Ukraine to win, we will have to enter World War III, where NATO officially sends large numbers of troops to fight in this war, not just in background capacity and other capacities that preserve life, but they're going to have to fight on the front lines, because Ukraine is going to run out of men so long as this war continues to be a war of attrition. And we've seen that there is no technological breakthrough. Abrams didn't do it. Infantry fighting vehicles didn't do it. ATACMS didn't do it. None of the technology that is being provided and can be provided that is conventional to Ukraine is enough to overpower Russia. And as such, we are in a war of attrition where NATO will have to send troops. Look at this. World War III is imminent without Ukraine. Historian predicts NATO risks World War III in Ukraine while lining the defense industry's pockets. Ukraine warns of World War III. Everybody's talking about it. And I heard one of my commenters said that, World War III, this won't be like, people fighting all over the world and this is not going to happen. No, but every country in the Western sphere of influence will be sending troops to Ukraine to fight, and those who are aligned with Russia will also be sending troops to fight. U.S. is sending more military advisors to Ukraine. They're mulling over it. That's what the original article said. But since the time of this article, the United States have deployed more military advisors. You remember Vietnam? Started off with a few advisors. Then it went to 10,000 advisors, 20,000, 30,000, 40, 50,000, always called advisors. We're going to see thousands of military advisors unofficially, and then officially, we will see American soldiers fighting on the front lines of Ukraine. If you say that you're not going to let Russia win, you're not going to accept any other outcome but a Ukrainian victory. Ukraine does not have the personnel to fight in a war of attrition. And so what you are saying is, especially those people in the West, those warmongers in the West, those Lindsey Grahams and others in the West, the Joe Bidens in the West, you're saying that you're going to send the Macrons and the Rishi Sunaks. They're saying they're going to send their children to fight on the front lines of towns all up and down the eastern part of Ukraine, the towns of which names they can't even pronounce, never knew existed before the war. They're going to send their loved ones. No, they're not going to send the rich kids to fight in Ukraine. They're going to send the poor of society, those who needed money for school and signed up for the army, those who needed a job and signed up for the military. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they signed up thinking that they would be defending their country, not that they would be going overseas fighting wars of imperialism and colonialism. And even if the war, you can justify it and say that it is just, the question is, did these people sign up to fight other people's wars, or did they sign up to defend their home countries? And this is the key. Once these elections are over, you got elections coming up in the UK, you got elections coming up in the United States, you've got elections coming up in different places across the world. They're holding out now just a little bit. They're giving you they're priming you when they're talking about advisors. They're priming you for the concept that we will be fighting in Ukraine. If it is true, and I believe it's true, that they are not willing to accept a Russian victory, and as such, they are priming the public for what is to come when these elections are over, that they will be sending our young men and young women to fight on the front lines of this war. North Korea, and this is why it is World War III. Let me show you this article. North Korea to send engineering troops to help Russia rebuild bombed cities. What is that? Nothing more than doing the same thing that the West is doing. They're calling them engineers. You can call these people whatever you want. You are sending personnel to help with a conflict. And when that personnel intervenes, whatever role they're playing, they are helping one side try to achieve victory over the other. And so ultimately, North Korea is sending troops, talking about it, and soon we'll have troops. See, first they start talking about it. They float a few stories. They float a few, well, we're thinking about it. We're mulling it over. Then they send a few troops. And then next thing you know, they send a few more troops. Next thing you know, it's a few more. That's the pattern of escalation. It's a way to prep and to prime the public in these countries and to soften their blow of them waking up one morning realizing, oh shoot, we're fighting hand-to-hand combat in trenches in Ukraine. We didn't sign up for this. No, it's a slow creep, and every time they make a little step towards it, it's a way to escalate without the public rebelling. South Korea will consider supplying arms to Ukraine after Russia, North Korea signed strategic pact. So this is what I mean by we are already in World War III. If you doubt it, all you have to do is search for the articles and try to put together a picture that is based on reality. We are in the midst of World War III because countries around the world are sending troops to Ukraine. Those in the West are doing it. Those in the global South are doing it. We are in World War III because they are sending munitions to Ukraine from the West, and the global South is sending munitions and support through Russia to Ukraine. And so ultimately, while it is it's not even a proxy war anymore, because you have troops from these countries who are fighting in these spaces. And they're not just training, they're helping with equipment restoration, helping with targeting, helping with frontline construction. These troops are engaged in heavy activities in these countries. Ukraine is now a world war, and Putin is gaining friends. As the West continues to push, Putin has continued to push and bring more allies to his cause. Oh, thanks for the comment. Appreciate the good analysis. Thank you for the comment. Keep on watching and keep on. Hopefully you will subscribe to the channel. Ukraine is now a world war, and Putin is gaining friends. Global proxy conflicts were a constant in Cold War I, and Russia's invasion marked the first of Cold War II. No, it did not. This is World War III. We will see more and more conflict as the sides begin to coalesce around their interests, not only economically. They're coalescing around the provision of munitions. They're coalescing around the supplying of troops and other types of support for this war effort. And in many cases, you have individuals from all these countries fighting on the front lines in Ukraine, fighting and supporting in a military capacity in country. This is not from abroad. This is not like having advisors and analysts sitting in the Pentagon sending over reports and information. No, these people are in country, real time, assisting with this war effort. And if that is not World War III, what else is World War III? No, they're not going to be fighting on every country and every continent like it was in World War II, but all of the players will have a role to say in this. And this is the key. One of the things that we don't discuss is that if Ukraine were to win, that means that this war would be dragged out in a way and that the conflict would spread into towns, into cities, and all over Ukraine. Because once NATO troops come in officially or come in a large way, you're going to have troops coming in from the global south in a large way. They're going to be fighting in Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian towns. They're going to be displacing citizens of Ukraine, both those who are loyal to Russia and those who are loyal to Kyiv. And it is going to leave Ukraine a wreck for a generation. It has already lost a population, a generation of young men to this war has been wiped out and devastated. But the landmass, the productive capacity, the economy, the housing, as this war continues to expand in its participants and in especially once different militaries officially begin to fight on the ground, it is going to wreck. You look at some of the cities in Ukraine and see how bad a condition they're in. Guess what? You've not seen the beginning of it once World War III gets hotter than it already is. So now let's look at another alternative. Let's look at the next one, and this is actually the third one, a stalemate. What happens if a stalemate occurs? A stalemate meaning that things stay, for the most part, the way they are. That both sides continue to push, both sides continue to lose personnel, that both sides continue to engage in long-range attacks. What does a stalemate really look like? Well, a stalemate, to be honest, looks like a loss. And I know a lot of viewers, I did a short video and I'm going to talk about it in the comment section in a minute when I get to viewers' comments. It looks like a loss because still, if there was a stalemate, Russia would retain Crimea, retain parts of Kherson, retain parts of the Donbass. It would retain parts of the northern buffer zone around Kharkiv, and it would just continue to pummel and to destroy on both sides. And the problem with that outcome is that more of the destruction will take place on the Ukraine side of the border than it will take place on the Russia side. And yes, Ukraine will continue to target oil refineries, but Russia will continue to target oil refineries in Ukraine, but also electric capacity within the country to target all types of critical infrastructure, bridges, in a way that leaves Ukraine as a collapsed state, a shell of its former self. And this is the issue I have with Zelensky, is that what was your end game here? You're listening to people who are sitting in cozy in their homes in Europe and in the United States, advocate for you to go to war because of your financial and political affiliations and what you and the elite believe are their interests, while not taking into consideration what this war will mean for the average Ukrainian. There is never a discussion about what this war means for the average person in Ukraine. Was it wise to go to war for the average Ukrainian? When you look at all of the Ukrainians who fled Ukraine, all of the refugees, all of the people who have relocated to Europe and relocated to other places to try to save their life, there's never a discussion about the human toll. And we talk about, whether this was smart or whether it was bravery or what was the motivations on the Ukrainian side that led them to engage in this conflict. And my argument is quite simple. Listen. If you're going to measure whether a military intervention or a military conflict is worth engaging in, the number one question should be, are the people going to be better or worse? Whether the Ukrainians win, lose, or draw, Ukraine is worse off for this conflict. And that was something that Zelensky could not imagine, fathom, care about when this whole thing started. If he did, he would not have been listening to the Western. He would have said, we'll take neutrality. Maybe we'll join the EU, but we'll be neutral and we won't have NATO here. Perhaps that would have been a better solution than listening to the Biden administration, listening to Boris Johnson. Man, that guy is full of it. The BS king of Europe was Boris Johnson, and they listened to him. Dispatched to disturb and to undermine negotiations for peace, he shows up, and the war now is prolonged. How many Ukrainians have died? Don't worry about how many Russians have died. Russians died. They had an interest. They pursued it. But my concern is for the innocent Ukrainians, who some of which were pulled out of barbershops, pulled out of their jobs, pulled off the street. A van roll up, pull you off. Next thing you know, a couple weeks later, you're fighting in Avdiivka, being bombed out, killed, maimed. And if you do return home, you are forever transformed. You are forever, your life is ruined. It can never be rebuilt. Your body is shattered. Your mind is shattered. When was Zelensky thinking about those people? And that's the reason why elections had to be canceled. It wasn't that they couldn't hold elections in Ukraine. And that's the other piece. We're giving money now to what is a dictatorship. Well, I think it was a coup, then a dictatorship, a quiet dictatorship. Now it's an open dictatorship. War as a stalemate in Ukraine looks like this. It looks like both sides continuing to pummel, to bomb, to extract a terrible cost on the citizens of both Russia and Ukraine. But I believe in a stalemate, the Ukrainians come out on the worst end of the destruction. Their lives disrupted, their economy disrupted. You know, Ukraine is you can call it a proxy state, but it's not even a proxy state anymore because it is totally dependent upon the West to pay. Its economy has been so wrecked by this war. A stalemate will not allow the Ukrainian economy to recover. And as such, Ukraine will become permanently dependent on Western aid. And those in the West who think they're going to be repaid when this war is over, in a stalemate scenario, Ukraine can never repay the loans because its economy cannot recover. Ukraine will be a situation where they will need the same amount of material, the same amount of military equipment, the same amount of artillery, long-range munitions, and the same amount, the West is paying garbage men in Kyiv. The West is paying to keep the schools open. The West is paying, the entire government establishment of Ukraine is being underpinned by Western aid. A stalemate continues that Western aid. How long do you think that's going to happen? Anybody who advocates for a stalemate, unless it's a resolution at current lines, which to me looks like a loss for Ukraine. But a stalemate means that they continue to fight, but very little progress is made on either sides. In that situation, Ukraine is the loser, is the definitive. I mean, there's no one who can convince me or should be able to convince you of otherwise. That if there is a stalemate and the hostilities continue, the West is not going to continue to fund Ukraine indefinitely. They're not going to continue to send munitions indefinitely. And so all of those things in my mind mean that, hey, one side or the other is going to have to win. Because a stalemate in the Ukraine war could now be the best case scenario, analyst says. But he's talking about not a hot stalemate. He's talking about a kind of a pause in fighting or a cessation of hostilities, something like what has happened in North Korea, where the war didn't end, but it, kind of like an armistice where it's still the tension remains, but at least they're not firing directly on each other. But in this instance, that would be a win for Russia. And I do agree with those who say that that's a win for Russia. And we'll talk about it in a minute. But ultimately, what else is the alternative? The alternative is a Russian win if you don't increase efforts, or to have World War III escalate in Ukraine and cause a human catastrophe and push us closer to a nuclear arms race. And this brings me to one of the viewer comments. And I'd like to, if you leave a comment, a detailed comment or something of substance in the comment section on the videos, I do go through them. Even in the recorded replays, I go through them and I try to pull out some for each program and address those in depth. One of the viewers wrote, Trump's plan to halt the Ukraine war is to give up and let Russia control all of Europe's natural energy. That is a terrible plan. The only people who think it's good to just give up and allow Russia to do what they want are people who are clearly ignorant to the fact about what the war is really about. And I do agree, there are a lot of people who believe mainstream media and they are ignorant as to the true cause of the war. And the true cause of this war is about control, geopolitical control, defense control, and the exploitation of the natural resources of the globe. And I agree with this viewer on that point. However, I have a point of disagreement that I'll get to here at the end. Wait till Russia takes control over Europe's energy and then equipment that's helped to manufacture advanced semiconductor components shoots up because of a lack of, and then it goes on. I think you get the gist of what their concern is that the Trump advisors are saying that they're going to pressure a cessation at current lines, which ultimately looks like what the scenario I just presented as point 3, which is a stalemate, a non-hostile stalemate, but a non-violent stalemate, even though it does not continue the destruction, still leaves Russia as a winner. Now, for some in the West, and I'm not picking sides on this matter, but there are those in the West that see and are correct that Russia winning will create a situation where it will begin to dominate, along with the global South, the resources that are associated with its own country for sure, and help to defend the natural resources of countries in the global South. And I think that's not a bad thing, in that countries should be able to benefit, to trade their gold, their silver at fair prices, that they should be able to operate without the threat of a coup or the threat of the Western powers sending arms and monies to fund counter movements within their countries. If Russia wins, the global South wins as well. And that's why there are those countries that are continuing to gravitate towards Russia, because they see this as a colonial overreach, that there was no justification for NATO moving towards Russia borders. They see this as there was no justification for Ukraine not just claiming neutrality and everybody moving on. There was no justification for a coup that topple the government. The global South see this conflict differently than the West. And those on the West that say if Russia wins, it will be on the catbird seat when it comes to natural resources and to control are correct. I don't disagree with you. That is correct. And the reason they will be in the catbird seat as it relates to natural resources is because the natural resources, much of which on the globe is located in the global South. And the global South is tired of their resources being exploited. They are tired of these coups and military interventions. They are tired of the West saying one thing and doing another. They're tired of currency manipulation, the stealing of their labor and their product. So yes, a Russia win means that there's a new bipolar world where China, Iran, North Korea, and members of the global South throughout the Sahel, Africa, Asia, as well as even some countries in South America, use this new alliance as a defense against incursion on their sovereignty. And if you look at the alternative, this is the question I'd pose to my friend, and for me, having a bipolar world is not the end of the world, but for those who benefit from exploitation, a bipolar world brings their corrupt regimes to an end. So for me, I don't see that as a threat. But let me pose this question to my viewer. If you're out there, which of these maps do you think that Ukraine is going to achieve? See, because as Zelensky has defined victory, he has defined victory really by claiming all of the territory. He says they're going to retake all the territory. How much material? You saw the Robotny offensive. If you paid attention, you saw the loss of Bakhmut with all of the troops and the Western equipment. You saw the loss of Avdiivka with all of the monies and the years of building the fortifications. It still fell. How many Western troops, how many of Western boys and girls are you willing to sacrifice? How much money are you willing to pay to help Ukraine achieve its goal of pushing Russia out of all of Ukraine and retaking Crimea? Let's be honest. See, because if what we did before was not sufficient, then you're going to have to redouble your effort. You're going to have to double the amount of tanks, triple, quadruple, because it was very little to gain from all of those offensives. And so if you're saying you're going to retake all of this land, you're going to have to X that by an exponential. I mean, you're going to have to, let's say, 100 times more aid, 100 times more money. How much more effort? And then they're going to run out of people to use that equipment. So how many young boys and young girls are you willing to sacrifice in order to maintain an unfair advantage over the global South, in order to maintain a regime of pressure and building military bases within regions where there are regional powers? How many Americans, how many citizens from UK and France and Germany are going to die in the trenches and fields of Ukraine to achieve what you're talking about is victory? Because as the West has defined victory through Zelensky, it's preposterous. It is laughable. So to achieve it would be an escalation of World War III on the highest scale. And even then, it's doubtful that it can be achieved, especially once those in the global South take up arms on the other side of this conflict. So the question is, what is victory? And you know, in the American debate, I have to talk about the debate last night briefly, because they're talking about stupid, porn stars who's sleeping. I don't care who slept with which porn star. That to me is irrelevant. I'm not choosing a leader based on some superfluous nonsense. They're talking about who's got a better golf swing. And the truth be told, though, nobody in the world believes that Joe Biden is playing 9 holes of golf. They don't even believe that Joe Biden is playing mini golf. His health looks atrocious. It looked like senior abuse on that stage. It was hard to watch. And Donald Trump didn't look that much better. He looked at least that he was coherent. But what he said didn't make much sense half the time. It sounded like gibberish, braggadocious nonsense. And I'm just calling a spade a spade. That was the worst presentation ever. And it was the worst presentation because they did not discuss the critical issue of what does victory look like in Ukraine from a Western perspective. If it was weakening Russia, that has failed. What does victory look like? What is the objective that the United States and the G7, is it truly to push? They won't tell you that. They won't say that in public because it sounds asinine. They won't tell you that in public because anything they say on that account makes them sound like idiots. If the goal of this war is to push Russia out of all of Ukraine, then people are going to say, well, how are we going to do that? And the only answer they can provide you with is the truth. Your sons and daughters will have to fight and die in Zaporozhye, the Donbass, and a whole bunch of other cities you can't pronounce and don't care about. They don't want to say that. They just keep talking about victory in this ambiguous term. There's no clear plan as to how the West wants to win. And if they continue to push it, what we'll end up with is exactly what Donald Trump is talking about. On this, I do agree, because if you're saying victory is getting them out of all of it, that's ridiculous. And if you're saying we're going to let them just keep going, the best outcome at this point may be a armistice. Not a hot stalemate, but an armistice. And in that way, the Trump side does have the day, because the Biden side has not said what they want other than more death, destruction, and dying.
Introducing Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, your exclusive gateway to in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Access Pass isn't just about watching the news, it's about joining a community. Engage with exclusive member-only forums, get recognized for your insights, and influence the conversation. Go beyond the headlines. Member-only live streams with award-winning journalists and economists answer your burning questions in real time. Access Pass membership unlocks exclusive benefits, discounts on merchandise, invitations to special events, and much more. Empower yourself with knowledge. Navigate the complexities of the world with confidence. Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, the key to a deeper understanding. Join the Access Pass community. The world is waiting. Are you ready? A year behind the curve, Zelensky's plea for timely aid. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, has repeatedly expressed frustration with the pace of Western military aid. His pleas, often delivered with urgency bordering on desperation, underscore a critical issue in the ongoing conflict: the West's strategic delays in providing Ukraine with the necessary means to effectively counter Russian aggression. This lag between Ukraine's needs and the West's response has had tangible consequences on the battlefield, raising questions about the true cost of hesitation in the face of an escalating conflict. Zelensky's pronouncements are not mere rhetoric. They are rooted in the stark realities faced by Ukrainian forces on the ground. From the outset of the invasion, Ukraine has been engaged in a desperate struggle for survival, relying heavily on Western support to counter Russia's superior firepower. However, the aid, while significant, has often arrived after critical junctures in the conflict, leading to avoidable losses and missed opportunities. The West's measured approach, often attributed to a desire to avoid escalation, has inadvertently created a situation where Ukraine is perpetually on the back foot, reacting to Russian offensives rather than dictating the terms of engagement. The human cost of these delays is immeasurable. Ukrainian soldiers, outgunned and outmanned, have fought valiantly, but have often been forced to make do with outdated equipment or insufficient ammunition. The lack of timely access to advanced weaponry, particularly in the early stages of the war, has undoubtedly contributed to heavier casualties and territorial losses. Beyond the battlefield, civilian infrastructure has also borne the brunt of delayed assistance. Russian forces, facing stiffer than anticipated resistance, have increasingly resorted to targeting infrastructure, inflicting widespread destruction and displacement. Zelensky's frustration is palpable. He argues, with justification, that a more proactive approach from the West, providing Ukraine with the necessary weaponry before Russian offensives, could have significantly altered the course of the war. Instead, the delays have often allowed Russia to seize the initiative, forcing Ukraine into a defensive posture and prolonging the conflict. The West's cautious approach, while understandable, has come at a high price, a price paid in Ukrainian blood and treasure. The price of hesitation, Avdiivka and beyond. The consequences of delayed Western aid are tragically evident in specific battles and strategic setbacks faced by Ukraine. The besieged city of Avdiivka, for example, stands as a stark testament to the human and strategic costs of hesitation. Located in the fiercely contested Donbas region, Avdiivka was subjected to relentless bombardment and ground assaults by Russian forces. Despite the valiant efforts of Ukrainian defenders, the city was reduced to rubble, a grim symbol of the war's brutality. Military analysts have argued that the fall of Avdiivka and the heavy losses sustained by Ukrainian forces defending it could have been averted or mitigated with more timely delivery of Western military aid. Specifically, the provision of long-range artillery systems, which the Ukrainian government had been requesting for months, could have significantly hampered Russia's ability to amass forces and shell the city with impunity. The delays in providing these crucial weapon systems allowed Russian forces to maintain the upper hand in the battle for Avdiivka, ultimately leading to its destruction and the displacement of its remaining inhabitants. Beyond Avdiivka, the human cost of delayed aid extends to the widespread damage inflicted upon Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Russian forces have increasingly targeted power plants, water treatment facilities, and other essential infrastructure. These attacks, often carried out with impunity, have plunged millions of Ukrainians into darkness and cold, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. The West's initial reluctance to provide Ukraine with advanced air defense systems, despite repeated pleas from Zelensky, allowed Russia to conduct these attacks with relative ease. The economic consequences of delayed aid are equally significant. The destruction of infrastructure, coupled with the ongoing conflict, has crippled Ukraine's economy. The World Bank estimates that Ukraine's economy will contract by a staggering 45.1%, wiping out years of economic progress. The delayed provision of financial assistance from Western nations has further exacerbated the situation, forcing the Ukrainian government to make difficult choices between funding its military and providing essential services to its citizens. The West's hesitation in providing timely and comprehensive economic support has compounded the challenges faced by Ukraine, potentially prolonging its recovery even after the conflict ends. The geopolitics of delay, shifting sands, and uncertain futures. The West's measured response to the Ukraine crisis, characterized by incremental increases in military aid rather than a decisive commitment, reflects the complex geopolitical calculations at play. Fears of provoking Russia, a nuclear-armed power, into a wider conflict have undoubtedly influenced the cautious approach adopted by Western nations. The specter of a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, with its potential for catastrophic consequences, has loomed large in the decision-making process. However, this cautious approach has also revealed divisions within the Western alliance, with some countries more willing than others to provide Ukraine with the advanced weaponry it needs. The debate over the types of weapon systems to provide, and the potential for escalation, has exposed differing risk tolerances and strategic assessments within NATO. While some countries have argued for a more assertive response, providing Ukraine with offensive weaponry to deter further Russian aggression, others have advocated for a more restrained approach, prioritizing diplomatic efforts over military escalation. This hesitancy, while understandable given the stakes involved, has nonetheless emboldened Russia, signaling a lack of Western resolve and potentially encouraging further aggression. The Kremlin has carefully observed the West's response, interpreting each delay and hesitation as a sign of weakness. This perception could embolden Russia to escalate its military campaign, believing that it can achieve its objectives without triggering a decisive response from NATO. The West's cautious approach, while intended to prevent escalation, may inadvertently be contributing to the very outcome it seeks to avoid. Introducing Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, your exclusive gateway to in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Access Pass isn't just about watching the news, it's about joining a community. Engage with exclusive member-only forums, get recognized for your insights, and influence the conversation. Go beyond the headlines. Member-only live streams with award-winning journalists and economists answer your burning questions in real time. Access Pass membership unlocks exclusive benefits. Discounts on merchandise, invitations to special events, and much more. Empower yourself with knowledge. Navigate the complexities of the world with confidence. Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, the key to a deeper understanding. Join the Access Pass community. The world is waiting. Are you ready?